Smartphone cameras are all the rage these days, and Sony and Nokia in particular have some of the best to offer. But which has the better smartphone? I'm Taylor Martin, this is Pocketnow, and this is the Sony Xperia Z2 versus the Nokia Lumia ICON. Michael just finished reviewing the Xperia Z2, which, at least from the outside, doesn't appear drastically better than last year's Xperia Z1. Turns out he was smitten with the device and said it's worth every penny. That's a tall claim in a day and age where some killer Android smartphones can be had for half the price. I also reviewed the Nokia Lumia ICON a few months ago and made some rather tall claims myself. I called the ICON the best Windows Phone handset yet. Michael thought I was being dramatic until he used the phone himself, calling it Verizon's first great Windows Phone. Two phones we really love, both of which offer exceptional camera performance. But which is the better buy? Let's find out in this Xperia Z2 versus Lumia ICON comparison. Before we get started, we want to thank our friends at GSM Nation for supplying us with the Xperia Z2 for review, and encourage you to pay a visit to their site by clicking the link in the description if you have the urge to pick up a Z2 for yourself. And we want to thank Verizon Wireless for lending us a Lumia ICON to review as well. It's clear from the moment you first lay eyes on these devices that both Sony and Nokia care a great deal about aesthetics. The Z2 may not be the prettiest device we've seen, and neither is the Lumia ICON, but both are gorgeous devices in their own right. The Xperia Z2 is a mashup of cool, slick glass and metal. The ICON, with a much more understated design, is stark in appearance and made of a matte finished plastic. The Z2 is a flat wafer design, while the ICON is contoured on the back and features that bubble effect on the glass which makes the front look as if water is pulled up and ready to spill over the edge. At the very least, both companies paid very close attention to detail. We'll leave the subjectivity of which device is prettier up to you. That said, we're confident in saying the ICON certainly feels easier and more natural to hold and use. That's due in part to the curved backside and the smaller physical footprint of the device. At just 137mm tall, it's a full 9.8mm shorter than the Z2. It's 2.3mm narrower as well, but 1.6mm thicker and 4 grams heavier. Worth noting is also the Z2's resistance to elements. It comes with an IP58 certification for dustproofing and water resistance for up to 1 meter for a half hour. This means, however, all the important ports are covered. The ICON, on the other hand, has no protection against splashes, spills, or dust. These two phones, oddly enough, stack up quite evenly on paper. The Xperia Z2 has 3GB of RAM, 16GB of inbuilt storage, a 32mAh battery, and a 5.2-inch 1080p IPS LCD. It's powered by a Snapdragon 801 chip, and it has a 20.7MP image sensor fixed to the back. The ICON has only 2GB of RAM, but doubled fixed storage, a 2420mAh battery, and a 5-inch 1080p AMOLED display. It's powered by an ever so slightly slower Snapdragon 800 SoC and has a 20MP optically stabilized camera. Both come with similar connectivity options, NFC, Bluetooth 4.0, and Wi-Fi AC. Though the ICON has Qi wireless charging support, while the Z2 has a typical pogo pins for dock charging, and the ICON, of course, has support for CDMA alongside its HSDPA and LTE connectivity. The displays on these two phones are something of a spectacle. Both 1080p resolutions and comparable densities, the ICON's display is notably more saturated and has much higher contrast, as well as far deeper blacks, thanks to the AMOLED technology. But it can't go without saying how much Sony has improved the Xperia Z2's display in comparison to previous Sony devices. The ICON's display is definitely more vibrant and crisp, but frankly we have very few complaints about either display. Unless you're a pixel junkie who stresses and loses sleep at night over color accuracy and contrast, you'll feel no different than us. In all, the hardware of these two smartphones is spot on. They're both incredibly solid and as well built as you can expect from any phone manufacturer. We prefer the slightly more manageable size and shape of the Lumia ICON, but we could easily be happy with either phone's hardware inside and out. Software and the respective ecosystems that envelop these devices are where these two smartphones diverge quite dramatically. The Xperia Z2 comes running the latest version of Android, 4.4.2, beneath Sony's heavier custom UI. This time around, Sony has packed quite a few more features, for better or for worse, into what used to be a fairly lightweight custom Android strain. Over time, Sony has been adding more bloat as other Android OEMs are trying to trim the fat. We're not totally turned off by Sony software, it's still pretty frothy. It just feels like Sony is trying too hard to differentiate its software in areas it doesn't exactly need to, focusing on areas other manufacturers have already explored and backtracked on. The Lumia ICON, on the other hand, runs Windows Phone 8, which is still the current version of Windows Phone. The Windows Phone 8.1 release date is set for July 11th, and until then, the ICON remains to be plagued by a slightly aged version of Windows Phone. It's not bad, just bland, especially after getting a glimpse of Windows Phone 8.1 developer preview. things like Cortana, Action Center, and wallpapers would really add some much needed pizzazz to the icon. The biggest difference, however, is still application support. Android, by and large, has a significant lead in application support, and while the so-called app gap on Windows Phone is narrowing, it still exists. No way around it. For more granular information on the respective software on these devices, be sure to check out our full reviews, both written and video, on Pocketnow. With the Snapdragon 800 and Snapdragon 801 chips in the Icon and Z2 respectively, both of these devices are built for speed and performance. They zip through everyday tasks and heavy gaming, switch apps quickly, and rarely ever stutter. They're virtually impossible to bog down. What you can do with that performance, however, is a different story. The app ecosystem, especially gaming and multimedia, somewhat limit the capabilities of the Windows Phone experience. There are far more popular gaming titles on Android, more graphically intensive games, and a lot more content to push your phone to the limit. If that's not quite what you're after, then it doesn't matter anyway, and you can rest easy knowing both of these phones will far exceed your performance needs for the foreseeable future. Speaking of multimedia, the loudspeakers on these two phones offer different advantages. Despite having front-firing speakers, the audio experience on the Xperia Z2 isn't all that impressive. The speakers produce a clear, crisp sound with little bass response. But the volume is considerably lower than that of the Icons, which is far louder but with less definition. It's a trade-off that leaves us feeling dissatisfied either way. Comparing call quality and data speeds is somewhat pointless, seeing as the Icon is on Verizon and we've been using the Z2 on AT&T. But to hit the high points, the call quality was actually notably better on the Lumia ICON, particularly in the earpiece quality, while the Z2 sounded muffled and too quiet. Both put up impressive data speeds though, reaching well into the double digits for downlink speeds and posting great uplink speeds as well. Battery life is also comparable despite the 780 mAh difference. We struggled to kill both of these handsets in a single day of usage. We won't say it's impossible, but through snapping lots of photos, benchmarking, gaming, syncing multiple Gmail accounts and social accounts, and browsing the web, both easily mustered a full day plus of use. But let's be honest, what you guys are really here for is the camera performance. Michael called the Z2 the best Android camera experience to date, despite no OIS and relatively low contrast. And although the Icon isn't quite as capable as the 1020, it puts out some compelling images too. By default, despite the 20 and 20.7 megapixel sensors, the Icon is set to take 5 and 16 megapixel images, and the Z2 is set to take 8 megapixel photos out of the box. In broad daylight, both manage to take exceptional images, though the Z2 has the tendency to overexpose on the superior auto mode. At the same time, the Z2's pictures appeared much warmer and natural in photos not in direct sunlight, whereas the Icon often produced cool, lifeless pictures. The next time we'd take a picture, the opposite would be true. And just like daylight photos, low light shots left us just as torn and undecided. At times, the Xperia Z2's camera would produce more natural colors and detail in poorly lit scenes, even with no OIS. Other times, the Icon's optical image stabilization would come to save the day and help capture significantly more detail with little light. All of these samples, of course, were shot using the out-of-the-box settings and auto mode. Fortunately, for those who want to get their hands dirty in the more intricate photography settings, both camera apps come with manual modes. In all, we'd be grasping at straws if we picked a clear winner in image sensing. We'll put it this way, both are going to deliver a better than average camera experience, but if we had to choose, we'd pick the Icon's 20 megapixel camera mainly due to the Nokia camera app and OIS. We're in a great place. We live in a world where we have to dig deep to nitpick and choose a winner in a device comparison. And surprisingly, this is one of the most balanced comparisons we've done of late. Two phones with gorgeous displays, beautiful industrial designs, above average battery life, great camera performance, and tons of horsepower. They both have the tiny things we love, like physical shutter buttons. And the Icon has wireless charging, and the Z2 is water resistant. The flaws of these two are few and far between, and that makes it particularly difficult to choose a winner. But we did anyway. Until the Windows Phone 8.1 update hits, the Icon feels a little sterile for our tastes, and Windows Phone itself is still working through some growing pains. And that's literally the only reason we'd recommend the Z2 over the Icon, unless you're looking to save a buck. You can pick up the Lumia ICON from Verizon Wireless for $549 sans contract, about $200 cheaper than you can currently get a Z2 in the US. Other than that, we'd be hard-pressed to choose one of these phones over the other. Folks, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this comparison, be sure to click the thumbs up button below, and of course, subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this one in the future. Be sure to follow us in all the usual places, Twitter, Facebook, and Google+, at Pocketnow. I'm Taylor Martin. You can find me on Twitter at CasperTech, and I will see you next time.